an exposure of 1 should be the minimum to get like the correct color. Right, so just to get that out of the way, this is usually what you should do before you go into the rendering stage, because if it works here, it will work in Marmoset as well. So, right. Usually I have like my preset export here if I do any PBR material for my, oops. Oh no. I love when that happens. It's going to lag a bit because I have Marmoset also running in the background already. Give me a second. Right, okay. I usually always only work with these parameters, with these maps, unless there's like some special kind of texture needed. For example, anisotropy level or specular level could benefit for some materials. The lava would be one of those that could potentially benefit from an exposed specular level. For those of you who don't know what this is like a secondary or technical reflection value, and it has very limited range, and usually it's about like 0.04, I guess. And this is like the medium for all materials that are non-metal, non-reflective. So anything like wood, stone, and stuff would never ever touch this value, actually, because 0.04 is like a good default one. There are, however, materials like charcoal, for example, they absorb so much light that this reflection value would be kind of offset and result in like grayish or blown out colors. For example, if you have a look at my base color, it's like really dark. Partly I had some clipping values already, like black clipping values, and I still get like with neutral lighting gray colors. In this case, lowering the specular value or exposing it could be a way to get this actual blacks that you want inside a material. But I'm going to show you how to do this in Marmoset later on and in the post-processing, of course. So once you get your like base maps in 4K, you export them over to Marmoset. And just a quick example, because I noticed this. Let me check again. There was one person here in. Oh yeah, pardon me if I say your name wrong. Is it Humza? Give me a second. I'm just going to show it. I noticed this sphere here, and by looking at it, I can only figure that this is actually a sphere, like a physical one that has no open faces. And I think I can tell this because there's some pinching happening at the top here. Just naturally how, if you create a sphere in the 3D program, is going to look like you have a lot of rings up here and very sparse geometry like at the outer rings. While this is per se not an issue, and materials that are often posted like that, you can avoid this. And you do this by, like you can see here, I'm only using a half sphere. And you can see like my material is really stretched at the outer UV level. It's like really stretched. And this is not an issue at all, because usually when you have a main camera, like the camera you're going to render with the sphere, it's usually like placed right in front, like perfectly aligned with your sphere. And if you use like a really low field of view, like you can see here, or even with high field of view, it's not that much of a deal. But with a low one, like 15, what I'm always using, you never get to see these edges. Like you get a free anisotropy effect, you could say, so that you don't notice the stretching of the texture, but you avoid pinching in the north and south pole of the mesh. It's a very neat technique. This also works with cylinders. If you if you mind the pinching, it isn't necessarily something bad. It's just like it annoyed me to see that, and I figured out that you could resolve this by using a half sphere. Yeah, however, I naturally imported the mesh, like it's a prepared half sphere. I can share it later. It also has some very high subdivisions already, and I'm still pumping this up to at least like 1 million vertices. It's not necessarily the fact that more vertices mean more resolution or better materials in general. I used to believe that a long time, but it completely comes down to how your height map is set up. Like the general rule is to avoid as much as fine detail in your height map in general and have it like a bit blurred and evened out. So the more geometry you give here and the higher you push the scale, the less noticeable the stretching should be overall. Like this is something you want to avoid as much as you can, and all the fine details should be put into normal so you don't get this ugly stretching that is happening here.
Sorry, may I come in for a second?
Yeah.
So yeah, it is true. It all comes down to your height map, but I don't know why. Well, I do. In Marmoset Toolpack 4 new version, having a little bit more of subdivision levels and more polys is going to affect a lot of the render of your material. Why? Because if you're using ray tracing, what makes the lighting look so realistic is not only how things are lightened, but how things are taken into shadows. So ray tracing takes everything in consideration. So the more polygons you have in a mesh, maybe in the sphere it's a little bit simpler, but when you go to planes it's a little more complex. Yes? The more polygons you have on it, the more, let's say, precise the software can be in the displacement. So the shadows of the ray tracing are a little bit more, like, let's say, specific in those cases. It's a little more technical on that side. But as you said, unless you have a really nice height map, then it's not gonna look. And I think it's also it's true that you should add some surface details in your normal map so you don't have that kind of pinching as well.
Yeah. Yeah, definitely. Like the ray tracing is a huge part in the realistic lighting. And definitely it's working. It's just generally working like looking at the surface and how light bounces off of that surface. So naturally, the more resolution you have for your mesh, the better the lighting will be. I just wanted to point out that I have this plane inside here, which I just forgot about, and I checked up on it, and it had like I don't know 4 subdivision levels, and it was at 16K, and I was like, okay, that's like my machine is lagging for no reason, because lowering at 2K triangles doesn't actually change anything noticeable for me. So there's a threshold at which point it doesn't necessarily add up to more detail. That's all what I wanted to say about this. But generally, yes, more geometry equals more resolution and finer details, of course. So yeah, so I got my sphere in here, and better don't look at all the transforms, because this was a preset I did like years ago and never touched again. Usually you should just even out all positions at 0, because it's the easiest way to deal with it. And the same for the camera. And the best you can do is add another camera, like this button here. So you have one to look in the viewport around and see where everything is positioned. And it just makes like moving in the viewport way easier than just adjusting your camera again and your transforms and all together. Right, so I get my main camera here. And like I mentioned before, I didn't touch this for a long time, for a good reason, because it just worked for me, and I figured the most work that is done inside Marmoset, for me personally, is having correct lighting or the correct exposure at the points where I need it. And the rest is done outside of Marmoset as post-processing in Photoshop or Nuke if you want. So all I did here really was to adjust my field of view. I personally like to have it like a bit more narrow, because I just feel like it gives a little bit more immersive feedback on the texture, and I used just 15 and adjusted my camera distance accordingly so that it's like perfectly framed here. If I check this button here, save frame, you could see like it's all evened out already for my thumbnail. So I never touched this again. Right, I even increased a bit strength and threshold here for the flares, but honestly I never ever make use of that, despite even seeing it, so I would recommend, like for me, just leave it as default. However, for the post effect, one big deal is you're going to start with linear, and this should be avoided by any means, because linear has like the least amount of dynamic range from all these here, and you can tweak like all your colors later on. Even if you like this like really natural or desaturated lighting, you can do that in post-pro. But you actually just capture like real dynamic range if you're going to use like any of these tone mappers here. One reason why I changed over to Blender is that AGX as tone mapper or as color space is not supported here. And it gives a bit more dynamic range in the saturation of colors in any exposure level. And that's just a personal preference. I feel like with AGX I get better results in the long run. By the way, Pino, can I ask you to mute yourself? There's sometimes some background noise. Thank you.
Oh, I'm so sorry about that, guys. I thought I was muted. Oops.
No worries. Right, so here also there are some settings I rarely touch. Mostly I just increase the exposure just a slight bit because it, like, in combination with contrast, like adds more into the darks, into the whites. It's like a free curve edit you can do here. But usually don't go overboard here. Again, you can go post-processing, you can do post-processing in here, but it's limited and you mainly want your lights to be correct and to be in place as you need them. I added a little bit of bloom. I would also recommend doing that in post-pro, but yeah, I guess it's fine. Like details like bloom, vignette or grain, and some other like chromatic aberration can add to realism if you use them very subtle, like even so subtle that they're barely noticeable. But that makes the difference, kind of. So I think I have it in here in some occasions when light is really harsh, that you can see it even in small values. But again, the post-processing is rarely touched besides the tone mapping and some light tweaks here. Okay, so let's get to the fun part. There are different concepts of lighting in general, and they pretty much all share like the same ideas behind it. You want to create contrast and interest in that regard, that you place lights so that you mimic a certain mood. For example, for the lava here, you usually want to have like, if I were to use an emissive map and make this like hot lava really popping, I would choose like, sorry Pino, you're unmuted again. it's
Oh my goodness, I'm so sorry, guys.
Okay, once again, so you want to depict a certain mood, and depending on which material you're building, this mood can differ quite a lot. And usually there's the concept of, like, the easiest concept is the 3-point lighting. So you have a light that's, for example, what the HRI does is like it depicts or it highlights the material in a what's called in a global way. Like there's it's just some illumination and some shadows happening across the surface. Then you're having like a light that comes like from the side of it to add variation. And then you have a rim light, like a light that's coming from the back and just lights up the back of the mesh. And that's a concept that's carried over from weapons to even architectural design sometimes, to characters and also to materials. So you could just go completely without a skylight and just add new lights like this. And I would go into my free camera here and start with, I think they're called Omni lights here. Yes. Let's see, reduce the brightness a bit and like move the light over here. And let's see where this is going. Yeah, so you can see this is like not perfectly positioned. Maybe a little bit here. Increase the brightness. Well, it's not perfect, but you get a sense. You have like that one light that should actually position your material in this kind of mood that you're going to depict. And in addition to this light, you want to have a different one that comes from the other side or maybe from top. So you get like a triangle in your surface in terms of lighting. And for that case, I'm just going to duplicate this light to facilitate some things, decrease the brightness a bit, and let's see, maybe put this up here and a bit closer to the surface. And let's have a look again. Maybe like that. Like I'm really just experimenting. It's completely natural that you're going to go back and forth over your lighting and adjusting several things along the way all the time. Yeah. And for the last part, I got this light already set up in the scene because it's a bit annoying to place. There's just like it's still an Omni light, like the other two. But I changed the shape from sphere to rectangle and make sure that like it covers the back of my material here. So it's placed behind the mesh. And if I untick this, let me choose a different light. You can see that we get this like very, in this case, it's kind of soft actually, but you naturally want to give like a sharp outer ring here. And it doesn't need to be like full backlit. Usually it's more interesting if it comes from a certain side. So you could, instead of using the rim light here, also place like a spotlight. Like just below here. Let's see. Well, it's not perfectly positioned, but you get the idea. Like you have another light that's just for the outer ring here, for the outer perimeter of your material. It just puts some emphasis on the edges. Something like that. It doesn't need to be much, really. It doesn't need to be much. The key point is you want to create variation and interest. Usually, a common thing to do is also introduce some color, like you want to weight like warm values versus cold values. That's like the oldest trick to create some interest, but you need to be like very careful inside Marmoset when tweaking this, because the color picker isn't working exactly like picking a color temperature, so you easily get like very colorful neon lights, I would say. So usually I'm very careful with the colors and mostly pick my colors around in the desaturated range here, only like slightly moving them over into the color wheel. Right, and this could potentially be like a render, maybe a render that I would go over in Photoshop. One thing I like to do is to play with my texture settings up here, like to increase the tiling, for example, and see if it looks even cooler maybe. Or just play with the offset values and see if there's like a certain spot that, I don't know, like works better in my lighting scenario. And the good thing about the sphere here, like how I set it up, you see it's slightly tilted here. That's actually an issue, but I never changed it. Like you can also rotate your material like easily without getting any stretching or distortion at the sides if you feel like this is looking better from a certain angle or from upside down. Like with this setup, there's like a lot of possibilities to get like a really cool render done. Right, so but for this I'm going to disable these lights again because I'm just going with my skylight. And for those of you who don't know how this works, you can literally like click into the HDRI preview here and place a sunlight at any point. As far as I remember, at least in the early days of Marmoset, there should be a live update of the light. Maybe it's just for me that I don't see it anymore because the brightness is not adjusted correctly. I always need to like tweak my brightness after I place the light, so it's not real time anymore, which is a bit annoying. But usually you can just like move your mouse with left click hold into the HDRI here and rotate the light already. Also, I think, oops, sorry. Default brightness should be set to 1 here, always for HDRIs. I feel like that's like it's not correct. I don't know what it is, but I feel like at least in my Marmoset, that's like not the correct brightness. And things we're working with high dynamic range and HDR or EXR fights here, it doesn't matter anyway because yeah, it's like a real dynamic lighting. So you can just up the brightness here without, as long as your colors don't get blown out, it's no big deal to increase this brightness here. Yes, so I had kind of like this lighting in mind. Again, I improvised this here now in Marmoset because I actually had a different one in Blender. I think I had this rim light here as well. However, there's one light that shouldn't be visible right now. Is it this? Oh, it's a bit too bright just. Yeah, let's say somewhat around this maybe. Yeah, not too sure. However, what you can see is that in terms of presentation, I tend to exaggerate the height as such so that I can break this natural sphere shape. There will be occasions for materials where this isn't possible, like, I don't know, some floor tiles just can't go too crazy in their displacement naturally because it would look off. But as long as you're working with organic materials, try to rake the primitive you're working on with material as much as you can, because it just adds on top of this really like presentation feel of natural texture that you're trying to achieve. Yeah, let's try it with this. Okay, so for the render settings, you can use rasterized renderer, but since Marmoset included ray tracing and your card supports it, there's no need to pick anything else because it just is so much better in terms of lighting. I increased the bounces to 5, which is probably overboard because I don't have any other geometry in my scene where bounce could light off except the surface itself, and I think 5 bounces on every little cavity here is more than enough. Yeah, also raise per pixel can be increased. Like these are like just quality settings. If you go too high with these, you're going to burn your computer and it's going to take years to render. If you're too low, you're going to see some noise, just some sample grain naturally. Right. What you want to tick here under output is transparency. This is like the most important button you can the most important checkbox you can accept here, as this will create like a free, perfectly shaped mask for your material, so you can tweak your background and also tweak the material not against any background color, because you're going to post-process the whole material, and if you have any color information in your back here, it's going to be affected as well, and you don't want it. You want to add a background after you did all that. Right, so I'm going to use PSD 16-bit just for the range. And I'm going to export like for the sphere render in like the 4K resolution in 1:1 aspect ratio. Right, I'm not going to denoise. If you can afford the samples and the bounces, never make use of denoising because it's going to blur your surface. It can help with render times or with animations, and that's fine, but if you're going for still render, you want to choose quality over time, so don't use denoise. Right, and I'm just going to render this. Let's see. Okay, it's not taking too long. Let's just work with this because I didn't prepare it. Yeah, Ezequiel, we can hear you speaking, by the way. If that's any issue to you. All right. Also, if I didn't say it, you want to change your viewport to full quality in order to make use of ray tracing. Draft quality will, of course, not work. So I want to go for full quality, but you can always remain in draft quality to change like some parameters or to work here if it's going to lag for you. Because I think Marmoset is going to change this to full quality either way when it's starting to render. So you don't need to work in full quality all the time. Also, just a quick note, you can add more cameras here to render if you want or if you need. For animations, this might be interesting. And you can also add more render passes. Let's see, what is there here? I mean, normals could be interesting, and yeah, that's mostly about it. Like for a breakdown, this could be cool to export these separately. But generally, you just need the final composite, even if that's not like the perfect way to do post-processing in general or compositing, because all channels are already combined. That's why it's named final composite. And the depth map is, well, for me personally, it's not needed anymore because I work in Photoshop and there's like a new, really good AI-driven lens blur filter. So I just avoid using that, but you could technically include this. Let's see. Well, it's not properly set up. Yeah, you need to use bounding box probably. This is just a good mask to help you control like a depth of field, because you can render with your camera, I think. Yeah, you can, like in the lens settings of your camera, you can enable depth of field. And of course, this will like help you blur out the edges, and it looks really good. But you should always, again, add this at the later stage of your post-processing, because if you add this now, this will remain. No matter what you do, this will remain. And when tweaking light values or exposure settings, anything that's blurred out tends to over or underexpose. So this is like the very last thing you usually want to do. If you're happy with the light overall in Marmoset, feel free to do that. But if you're going to post-process later in a different software, don't render with depth of field. Just render your depth pass if needed and do it in a different software. Yes, and I need to turn this down in order that my machine doesn't burn. And that should be my render. I'm also going to lower the resolution here because I feel that Designer is not very good at hashing textures. I don't know if that's true, but I feel like it's more taxing on a machine if the resolution is just set to be 4K. Like maybe they're updating something in the background in order to make everything more responsive, but it just feels more laggy. So here in Photoshop, you can see that this layer has already the alpha mask. This is what you export if you hit transparency in the output settings. You can enter this by clicking Alt and left click, if it's necessary, but just to showcase. And the first thing I do is to add a new layer, call it background, and just fill with black, or actually with, I think, this tone, because this is what ArtStation used to use in their portfolios. I don't know what's now. I needed to sample this. But the last time I used it, it was 23, 23, 23, and this would result in your material being displayed as transparent background in your portfolio, if you would like to add that. So in the next step, I'm going to select my layer and make it a smart object. For those of you who are not working or familiar with Photoshop, converting something into a smart object makes it like editable. It gets like a history, like in ZBrush, for example, in which you can edit every operation you did while it's a smart object at any point of time. So all changes I do are never final unless I decide to rasterize it again. And I don't know, here, rasterize layer. Until I hit this button, everything is subject to change, always. So all things I do in my post-processing, I'm going to show you now, like literally anything. There's no much variation for the things I do. I'm going to use the camera raw filter. It's like your all-in-one Swiss knife tool you need to use in order to get like good post-pro settings. Because it has like all controls you will ever need right here. Right, so for the newest version, they changed up a bit of the parameters. In the last version, like this color tab was at the very top, and that was convenient because everything I did in my post-processing stack was like ordered already, organized from top to down, or top to bottom. And now color is at the second place, which is a little bit odd because you usually want to start with this. And it's just because here are the white balance settings. So depending on what you render, for example, with this one here, I have like a mix of cold lights down here and warm lights in the upper part here. And you kind of want to avoid having your render either too cold or too saturated and too warm. And a way to do this is by sampling a white spot. Like if you click this dropper, you need to pick any pixel here that actually should depict a white value. Usually you have like a color checker down here that you render together with this, so you can actually pick white. In this case, I don't have any white spot to really pick from. So I'm just going to, and again, this is only how I do it. I just pick any bright spot I can find here, like any white spot. And I'm going to have a look at these values and my outcome and decide if I if I just like what I see. That's all I'm taking care of right now. And I think I got lost a little bit too much from the warm light, so I'm going to reintroduce a little bit of temperature. And I think I could also make this bigger so anyone can see what I'm doing here. Right, and usually I like to increase my vibrance by just a little bit and at the same time decrease my saturation. It's just like, I can barely explain why this works, but usually most of the materials or most of post-processing you do is positively affected if you're going for realism, if you tweak these values against each other. But honestly, I wouldn't be able to explain why this is happening. Right, so the next thing after color would be to tweak your light settings. And I am used to have underexposed exports, so usually I would like tweak the exposure just slightly. But let me explain this differently. If you have like a very dark render, and by very dark I mean not barely noticeable, but just darker. Let's say like your exposure is like this, like a little bit flat. You would tend to increase the exposure and introduce more lighting as a positive effect. But this could potentially be a trap because you have like from your 4-point lighting or your 3-point lighting, you have different spots with different intensity and color. If you increase the exposure, this is going to affect all your lights, and you can tweak them separately, even though they're in your final composite. So you want to go like very subtle with this, only bringing back like all your colors into range so that no values are clipping. For example, let me see. Okay, I usually, if you click this button here, usually if you click this button, you get like a histogram that's warning you about clipping values. So anything that it's clipping in black should be highlighted in very light blue. I don't know why this is happening, but I feel like these values down here could potentially be black clipping. And again, I want to avoid that, so I'm bringing up my exposure just a little bit to see if I can mitigate that issue. In the next step, usually you want to increase your contrast a bit. Contrast in general is what makes a thumbnail pop. It doesn't necessarily be the way to go if you're going for like the presentation renders inside the project, but for the thumbnail, a good contrast can like really make the difference because it's only like so small in the timeline and you want people to actually click on it. And naturally, contrast is just attracting eyes. It's like you gotta work with what you get. At the same time, increasing the highlights, decreasing the shadows, increasing the whites, and decreasing the flex. You gotta work with these values for each material differently. And just see that you see, like if you go too high with the whites, I get this like red warning about the clipping. You just want to make use of the full range if you can. Like your whites should never be like full white, but potentially come close to it, and the same goes for your blacks, depending on what mood you go for, of course, but it's just a good way to increase contrast. And at some points, I really just move these sliders until I feel like I need what I got. And this is really just practice and doing this over and over until you know what you're looking for. So now we go under the effects tab. And this is probably what beginners love to use because they increase this texture slider and they increase this clarity slider and they go like, that's so much detail. And they're right, it's adding detail, but it's not helping your realism. Having crisp textures is cool. And can I zoom here? Yeah. Let's go back to 0. If you see that I'm increasing like the texture slider here, I really get contrast in these cavities. Like every single pixel that is like brighter than its neighbor is going to be affected by this and just really make to pop. But this is not what you would usually see when you're taking a photo of something. Like your lens is usually affected by different light conditions. You might have some lens dirt. You usually have a limitation of your resolution and also some grain and pixels. And the higher you go with your texture and your clarity and the more like granular noise you introduce, the more artificial it's actually going to look. Like in the first place, it just looks great. If you increase the sliders, it just makes everything pop and more detailed, but ultimately it's actually hurting what you're doing. So if you use this, only use it slightly to maybe increase a little bit of fidelity. But in a lot of cases, it can also help to just reduce the texture overall and like give it a slight surface blur, I would call it. It could help. It's like every project is different, but usually I'm rarely increasing these sliders at all. In most cases, I'm just even decreasing them because we're going to add so much more contrast over the lights and over the curves that you just don't need them on top. It's just too much. Dehazing, by the way, can also work if you're having exposure issues. So decreasing this would introduce haze, while increasing the dehaze would like remove any glow or bloom. In most occasions, I lower this also just a bit to introduce more like of this halo effect that you would have usually when there's light coming from the back of a material and the lens is looking directly into it. Right. Also, there's the vignette slider here, and this is an issue to a degree because with our current layer, we are only working on the sphere itself and not the complete render. Like it's not affecting your whole thumbnail here. So adding vignette here would only affect your sphere. And I mean, if it looks good, if it helps to sell what you're trying to achieve, use it. But in general, this slider right now is useless because it's just acting on the wrong information. And now we got the curves. You can spend like days in this little window here trying to tweak values forth and back. Usually, after I did my lights up here, I'm going to readjust the highlights and the lights in here because this is now, you can see it in the histogram, it's now really splitting all the gray values or all the luminance values you have in your image. And the easiest way to add contrast is to get your darks a little bit down and your highlights or medium a little bit up. Especially with 3-point lighting, this can really help to increase like the shadow tones in the lower part and the brighter parts in the upper. Yes. Again, if you're going for realism, this is probably not what you want to do. It's definitely cinematic and interesting and good looking. If you're going for realism, you usually like maybe even reverse the sliders a bit. You want to get the darks up so you can like make this lighting a little bit more natural, like you would see it in a overcast scenario. But for portfolio renders, I tend to just go for this S-shaped curve. Like if your curve looks something like this, you usually have like okay or good values. It just depends on what you see here. For me, it's going to be a little bit too dark, so I'm increasing my values here again. Right. And now that I have this in place, I'm going to lower the overall exposure again and trying to introduce like more highlighted lighting rather than the whole texture. So I can bring up the darks to like, or the shadows to lighten up the whole material rather than using the exposure and then tweak my highlights separately. Next up, we have the color mixer. It's not always needed to make use of this. In some occasions, for example, for plants or foliage, if you include any of this in your material, it can definitely help to tweak the yellows and the greens against each other to avoid like this jungle plant feel versus dry grass. Personally, I feel it's really hard to get the values for like several plants adjusted correctly, so this is actually really helpful to tweak them against each other. In this case, there's no much need to do this. The only color I got here is yellow, and so far I feel it's actually quite good looking. We're also not going to go too much over the color grading. A general rule of thumb here as well is to, like, this is the part where you can change and adjust your lighting scenarios separately. So for example, I know that I have my highlights and my midtones like in the warmer area here, and my cold and dark tones are down here. So I could just go into the shadows, for example, and like tweak them a little bit bluish, while my midtones are going to be like a little bit more red and warm. And you see, like, if I'm disabling this forth and back, that it's like a very subtle change. It's just a little bit warmer, and at the same time down here, well, this is actually barely noticeable. I would need to increase this a bit. Yeah. Right, so right, this would be the place where you could like increase or decrease the color or change it overall of your light to average them against each other. Right, so let me have a look for a second. There's something missing. All right, under the effects tab, they also moved that. There's this grain slider. I feel like it's not doing a lot right now. Oh, no, it's doing a lot. It might look odd, but usually you want to add some grain, because it just gives this natural appearance and how cameras actually picture images, like when they're projected onto the lens, onto the sensor, and this grain just, I mean, you're going to barely see it from a distance, but trust me, it's going to add a little bit of realism. And you can also add this later, but for my personal edit, I feel like this little bit of grain isn't hurting me in any way, so I'm not going to add this later, but just increase it here in the camera raw filter already. So for the optics, you also don't need to use this. This is actually just for like portraits of people. But what I feel like works good is a little bit of barrel pinch. So if I decrease the distortion, there's going to be like this Gaussian distortion towards the viewer, so the mids are going to be popping a bit more to your eye. And I personally think this is cool looking, so I'm adding it like all the time. And for the last part, this is what I told you about the depth map that I'm not rendering anymore. There's this really good AI-driven lens blur filter. It takes a while to compute for your image, even if you're working with high resolution. But it just works so good out of the box for what you need that I'm not even bothering using the classic approach anymore. So let me see if I can exaggerate this a bit. Well, yeah, like it's now really crazy with the blur just here in the outer edges. And with this slider here, you can like tweak the range, what should be in focus and what not. And you see how this is. Oh, it's really lagging right now because of the stream. But I think I would lower this a bit. Sorry, it's like really lagging right now. Yeah, I would lower the blur in general. Like, don't make it too hard. It's just about that details that are further away from the camera shouldn't be as crisp. That's like everything you want to achieve with your lens blur. You can go more dramatic and cinematic by increasing a higher amount of blur and actually crunching the range down, so it's like some points on the surface are only really in focus while the rest is completely blown out. But in general, you just want to avoid that any crisp details are going to be noticeable the further away actually the material is you're looking at. That's your main goal of adding this lens blur here. Maybe something like this. It's lagging too much right now to really be sure about what I'm doing. So I'm just going to lower this a bit and roll with it. Also, with this button, you can go forth and back between your edits, and it's not doing this right now because of the lag. So I might as well just close Marmoset here for a second. Right. Yeah, these buttons down below are just there to like change the layout of the viewport here to see what changes you made. And if you're happy with the result, you're just going to hit OK. And this is going to process the filter and apply it as a smart filter here on your layer stack. And now you can enable and disable this. And I feel like I might have lost all my changes in between by pressing some button as it was processing. Let me have a look right now. Oops. Yeah, it feels like everything got lost in between as it was lagging. So let me just quickly get something back, like just something we can work with really fast. I think I have like most settings still in mind. And I'm going to avoid using the lens blur for now, so all right. Oh, I got two filters now. Something was messed up, but don't worry too much about it. We got some, like, it's only important that you see that there's a change happening before and after. And the good thing about the post-processing is that there's like no rule of thumb behind this whole adjustment. The general idea is to have something look better than before, and this can be completely subjective. So just tweak those values until you're satisfied. Like, you don't need to copy all my settings. I didn't copy them as well. It's just a matter of I tweaked so off back and forth that I know that these settings usually tend to work good with how I light my materials. And this also is completely different for anything that's not a sphere. Like for planes, this is way more work for me because I'm very unhappy with plane lighting for some reason. Right. So now I got this. There's two things you can do. Three things actually. One thing would be to duplicate your layer by pressing Ctrl and J on the keyboard. And I'm going to rasterize this one. And if you go under filter and high pass, you get something that you like, that's familiar for most of you from Designer. And you want to have like a really tight radius, so it's really grainy. And if you're going to add this over with overlay, you can like reintroduce this clarity filter that we talked about before, which can help like for the whole material. I don't know how good it can be seen in the stream if I'm going back and forth here. But what's good when separating this into a separate layer is that you can like actually mask this out. So I could just fill my mask here with black now, pick a brush, like a really soft one, and just like add this here in the middle. And what this will do is also help you increase or sell this illusion of anything that's here at the side, at the back, is far away from the viewer, because only in the middle here, in the center, there's actually fine-grained detail, and in the back, it's not affected. So that's a really cool and neat trick to give it a little bit more pop. And I'm going to duplicate this here one more, and also rasterize the layer. I'm just going to quickly name this bloom and move this above. And what you can do now is to take a Gaussian blur and like really blur the shit out of this material, like something like 200, for example. And you're going over to a screen mode, a screen blending mode. And now you can like tweak with the opacity like a post-pro blur filter. It's like not a lot different from what a screen space bloom would do as post-processing effect. So yeah, this would help. And you could also just like, if you like copied your transparency mask before, so like this mask here, if I'm just quickly going to grab this and go back here, I could also apply this to my bloom and now only make it affect like the material itself. If you like, I don't know, like if you just like this visual here, it's like personal preference to add this. And after that, you can just go into the mask again and like paint in here, for example, like at the outer ring. And this will help you like control where the bloom is happening and how much. You could also just, for example, kill it all down here completely and just make it like here in the upper part. Right, and when I'm done with that, I disable my background. And there's a shortcut that's like Control, Shift, Alt, and E. Like it's really inconvenient, and I've never heard about it ever until some smart guy explained it to me. Next up, I'm going to group everything I did before and just hide it. And what this combination does is to take all my layers with all the filters and everything I applied so far and do a copy of this. Like it just screenshots my current viewport and makes a new layer out of this. And this is cool because I have now like all my effects like in a separate layer, and I could still go back and tweak everything back and forth. But now all my effects together are considered when I move on editing my material. So you could, for example, add another camera raw filter now on top if you want and tweak more values over and over. But what I like to do is go in under the adjustments and into the color lookup adjustment layer here. And right now I have only like a few to choose from because I didn't carry them over from my last Photoshop version. But these Fuji Eterna and Kodak filters are like the most interesting to add here. Like I add this LUT file on top, and now I can just go through those. You can see here in my drop-down menu with the up and down key, and I can see if there's any effect that like really, I don't know, gives this extra feel, this extra pop I need still for my material to make it look like I want it. Usually it's, I think, one of these Kodak filters. Yeah, I usually use one of these. I like this one especially because it gives this feel of a old camera. Like very old cameras tend to have green and red colors kind of more prominent for some reason. I don't know the reason for that, but it's just how older pictures look. And now you can also just increase and decrease the opacity of this filter until you're at a point where you say, yeah, this is actually really satisfying to look at. And after that, you can like add your background back in. And now I need to improvise a bit. Let me quickly think about this. I don't know if this is working actually, but I'm just going to try it out. I usually have a mask for this already. Okay, I got lost in between, but oh right, I remember how I did this. So let's assume I'm done. Like I got my color lookup. If I want to edit, I got my final merged render and I get my background. I could now again do Control Shift Alt and E to get like a composed layer of everything I did so far. Like this is my final thumbnail. And the easiest way to like add the last bit of detail now is to go back into your camera raw filter and under, where is it now? Right, under effects, you can now add like the vignette effect. And now it's affecting like your whole thumbnail. And usually I decrease the midpoint a bit and also decrease the roundness. So you get like more of this in the edge here. And play with the feather settings so that you don't see the shape that's actually lying behind here to add the vignette. Just make it really soft. And after that, you can like play with the values until you get this this fade from the outer sides to the inner parts of the material. And also at this point, if you want, you can, it's also here. You can increase like the grain again. Now it's really noticeable because the background is just one solid color. So don't want to go overboard with this, but yeah. Right, and this is actually really always my go-to processing. Like I did this for years. Like from the day I learned how this works till last week, I did nothing else every time. So are there any questions after I've been talking for over an hour straight?
Hi, how are you?
Hi, I'm good. How are you?
I have a question. I did the forest growth
and you told me about something like adding three cards to cast a shadow on the floor. So,
Yeah.
how can you add shadows? Like I was having a trouble. Like I place a tree mesh and want to cast a shadow on the plane surface of the forest floor, but the when you increase, I want to like a harsh shadow, like a strong shadow, not so we can see the leaves of the trees on the forest floor. But when I
Yeah.
increase the light increases too much, and I get a shadow, but it just breaks for too much light on the forest floor. So what's the balance like? How we can adjust? We can get good shadows as well, and the lighting looks okay. Are there any tips you can tell?
Yeah, let me just quickly boot up Marmoset again. There's a specific scene where I can show you this. Just give me a second to find it, because this could take a moment. Yeah, my naming is crazy bad for all the projects. I gotta admit, this is taking way too long to find. Question is, do I have like... Oh, this is all from November. Let me quickly hop into my portfolio, because I don't actually remember how I caught this material. This would probably help a lot. Where is it? Here. I think you mean like this, right? Where you can like see separate leaves of shadow onto the surface, right? That's what you were asking for.
Yes, like I was trying to add the shadows of the tree leaves, but they were like too soft.
Yeah, all right. Nice. This is it's a bit annoying that I don't find the scene right now. I'm going to see if I can show it in a different one, because I need to collect my... I have also... Okay, while we wait, I can explain what I would do. The reasons your shadows are soft is probably because of the light you're using. From what I can tell in your scene, you have an active skylight. I don't know if there are any direction lights below it.
Yeah, I use a skylight and a direction light.
You use one direction light, okay. So the direction light would need to be adjusted. Is it? Oh, good point. I actually don't know if Marmoset really gives the opportunity to do that, or if I faked it. Usually you have like, for direction light, there's also something like the spot angle. I can only tell from the viewport that it's actually affecting the spot as such. For direction lights, usually you don't have like a direct spot, because it's like a global omnilight, but decreasing a value that's somewhat named like spot would result in harder shadows. So for a classic sunlight, it should be 0.533, I guess, was the value for hard shadows. And anything that's below 3 would already result in blurred out soft shadows for direction lights. yeah, what you naturally could do is increase the brightness, of course, but this would overblow your exposure. Another option would be to place like a spotlight or an omni light that's just right positioned behind your trees. Yeah, that's like better would be a spotlight that's really shining from behind your trees onto your surface. Oh, but Marmoset doesn't have light exclusion, right? It's actually a good question. Actually, a good question. Let me see if I have some meshes here. Maybe just a grunge texture. We could try to make that work. Give me a second. Do I still have the plane here? Yes. I have a plane here. That's good. I'm going to move that over here. And it's going to get a cutout transparency. And I'm going to add like this grunge here. So let's just remove any light. And add a new one. That's like go from here, yeah. You can already tell that it's casting the shadows. It got a spot angle of 0.1. Let me increase this. Okay, it doesn't change for Marmoset. It doesn't change. Oh, then it's the diameter. Okay, it's the diameter here. This value needs to be low, like probably 0 if you want real hard shadows. Anything above that would just blow these shadows out. And if you increase the brightness, you can, of course, introduce them back. Like even with higher diameter values, this would work, but it would theoretically blow out your texture. So if you want to like have really crisp shadows, go with a very low diameter, then you can reduce the brightness to still have the leaves here. And you need to make sure that whatever is casting these shadows is set like right in front of the light source. For directional lights, this should not be affected, of course, because they're directional. If you're going to use any kind like spotlight or omni light to reduce the effect on the overall surface, you need to make sure it's placed right behind your shadow cluster. Let's see, where's the light I just placed? Hold on a second. Here. Yeah, as you can see, like I don't know how good it can be seen, but the further away I move the light, the lesser sharp the shadow will get, and also light not too bright, and the closer it is, the harder your shadows are going to be. And you should also be able to tweak with the diameter here how sharp they are. Yeah. And looking at this, again, you don't need to place actual tree geometry in your scene. It can definitely help, of course, but you can also just use any mesh cards to like fake this if you want to. Yeah.
So thanks. Well, yeah, like we don't want to use any geometry. We can use a mesh card with any noise on this to cast shadow on the forest plane. Am I right?
Yeah, exactly. Like this material here probably should be set to unlit. So it doesn't like affect. Like you can see, if I'm going for Lambertian, like for this diffuse model, you see that the surface is going to be lit a little bit because the plane itself has a surface that reflects light, and you usually for shadow casting objects want to set this to unlit, so it doesn't affect your surface in any way. and you want to use a cutout mask for this specific plane that is going to block your light. And after that, you can just, you can see, you can pretty much stamp anything you want onto your surface.
Okay, I understand. Thanks, man.
Sure thing. All right, any more questions? If not, I'm going to give it away for Ezequiel. All right, people. If there's anything like you can think of in the next days or at any time in the future, just like hook me up on the Discord. I'm here anyway to help. And thank you all for listening.